Well, recently the telecom regulator, in a bid to counter pesky calls, ordered all service providers to ensure within 6 months that all smartphone devices registered on its network support the functioning of a DND app. Now, the TRAI order further says that any phone that does not support the functioning of a DND application should be derecognized. The DND app, developed by TRAI itself, helps users report unsolicited messages or calls. But there is a catch. The application, in its current form, also seeks access to calls and messages on the phone that it has been installed on. And this has been a major bone of contention between TRAI and American tech giant Apple. Apple has refused to make the application available to its users. Apple believes that the application in question is violative of customer privacy. As things stand today, millions of iPhone users in India may lose access to telecom networks unless Apple complies with the TRAI order over the next 6 months, or the TRAI order is in fact quashed if Apple decides to move court. So is this an instance of regulatory overreach by the telecom regulator? Joining us this evening, Gopal Jain, Supreme Court lawyer, and on the show, Piyush Joshi, partner at Clarus Law Associates, also with me. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us. Piyush, let me start by asking you, because you've written a piece for us on cnbctv18.com, where you believe that this is the TRAI's version of its maverick moment, where it is clearly outstepping its boundaries and batting beyond the crease.
Yes. Quite frankly and quite clearly, the TRAI Act does not vest the jurisdiction with TRAI to order the recognition of phones. What it has the authority to regulate the equipment used in a network, but not when that equipment is in the hands of the end consumer or the subscriber. If the end consumer equipment has been given the correct authorization by under the Telegraph Act and the Wireless Telegraphy Act, the TRAI cannot say derecognize that specific equipment, which is in the hands of the subscriber. They can very well look at what should the network equipment contain. Okay. And at the second point, TRAI doesn't have the jurisdiction to mandate a service provider to derecognize or remove services to the end consumer and subscriber when the telecom license requires the licensee to ensure quality of service and that it is able to provide that service at all times.
So many issues that you find with the order that the TRAI has put forward when it comes to protecting consumer interests by way of this application. Gopal Jain, would you agree with what we've just heard from Piyush, that this is overreach on the part of the TRAI, and if Apple or any other phone manufacturer decides to challenge this in a court of law, TRAI will find itself on a weak footing?
You know, like in cricket, when you bat on the front foot, that's good. But if you go well out of the crease, you can be stumped. So this is an example of overreach and stepping out of the crease to be stumped, because clearly the law defines the limits and boundaries within which they are to operate. And if they were regulating operators or the end user, that's within their purview. But I think a measure like this, and an ill-timed measure, because there are many privacy-related issues which also come out of disclosure of information, which I think everyone is waiting for the Sri Krishna report. So I think the whole purpose of a regulator is to increase connectivity. But this is really going to be a case where you're saying, okay, please remove people from having access to the network. So you can couch it in niceties to say, oh, I'm dealing with pesky calls, but you have to do it in the legally correct way. Yeah. That's point number one. And point number two really is, as Piyush rightly said, that when it comes to equipment on a standalone basis, and that in the hands of the user, that's really outside their ambit, right? Anything which is used in a network, that is something as part of the overarching exercise you can do. And lastly, really gives them an access or a peep into information, customer information, which is confidential, and there are privacy-related issues built around it. And lastly, unusual, we have usually regulators are not, they don't sort of come up with apps. So here really he's putting on a different cap, if I may use the word, like an entrepreneur, businessman, discovering an app and then making regulations to ensure that that app is put to use. I think that's not really in his province.
Okay, let me pick up on those last 2 points, Piyush. One, the conflict of interest, or the potential... in short, you have many issues with the TRAI order as well, as does Piyush. But Piyush, let me pick up on the last 2 points that Gopal made. One is, of course, the issue of privacy. And why is that such a big issue? I'm looking at what the TRAI My Call app does. The app reads the contracts on the user's phone. It knows the location of the user and precise phone numbers. It can reroute outgoing calls, read the call log, read the phone status and identity, write call log, read the contents of the phone's USB storage, modify or delete the contents of the USB storage. I mean, this is your big concern as far as why this should be embedded or mandatorily embedded onto a phone.
Yes, just to give an example, certain journalists keep getting a whole number of spam SMSs. And in order to stop that, if they approach the TRAI, TRAI says, I can only assist you if you download the app. Now, when they download the app, the government will get to know exactly who's on their call record, what was the call registry, what time someone called, at what location that particular journalist was. And that is a cause for alarm, because so
you're using journalists as an example here.
Yeah, even lawyers,
to make the surveillance state argument.
No, can I just come in? Can I just come in for a minute? It's like a peep device. Gopal. You're actually saying through this app, it's a peep device. And second, regulator under law is mandated to ensure transparency in its decision making. This is perverse transparency. Make all the call logs and information which is otherwise confidential, proprietary or governed by privacy. They want disclosure of that. Perverse form of transparency. So really one has to see how they can even think of something outlandish, maverick. But this is really, if I may say so, well over the top. Not OTT, but well over the top.
Okay, not just OTT, but well over the top. Now, Piyush, you know, in that piece, right at the very end, you've also sort of described yourself as somebody who loves your iPhone. Now, for the millions of iPhone users here in the country, because the Google has, of course, complied or agreed to go with this, but Apple so far hasn't. You know, how worried should an iPhone user be? I have no concerns. I'm still on my old BlackBerry. So, but how worried should an iPhone user be today?
See, lawyers will go by the letter of the law, and the letter of the law is definitely worrying, because what it says is that if within the time provided,
which is 6 months,
it is not complied, and on a direction from the government, each network provider will have to derecognize these instruments, which is simply, you know, if I just read that, I'm going to go ballistic. And I definitely would not want to switch to, say, a Samsung just because a big, great factory got opened in Noida a couple of fortnights ago. But I wouldn't say that is the whole issue. The whole issue right now is there a requirement for stopping pesky calls to derecognize an instrument? And is this the best way?
Is this the best way to do that?
Exactly, and it actually hurts the consumer who you are trying to protect, so you cannot claim it to be in consumer interest.
By derecognizing the phone itself, which clearly doesn't seem to be in consumer interest. But Gopal, how does this stack up against previous orders of the TRAI when, you know, the telemarketing industry was flourishing, was in its sort of heydays, and the TRAI even then had tried to sort of put a cap and a restriction on the number of SMSs to curb the bulk usage of SMS. Then there was an increase as far as price was concerned to penalize telemarketers. And even those orders ran into trouble with the court. So, you know, how does this order stack up with previous orders and the way that the courts have looked at the regulator's intervention?
Yeah, let me give one example, which is popularly called the call drop issue, right? We all know what call drops are. It was a menace. The TRAI came up with regulation, and the Supreme Court quashed the regulation, saying they were without jurisdiction, violative of transparency, and their entire decision-making process was, you know, sort of threadbare, torn apart. So you have to learn from this, and like you said, the earlier regulations which they did also ran into rough weather. Point is, if you have a problem, find a remedy which deals with the problem. The remedy can't be worse than the problem, and in the name of consumer interest, it can't be, you know, anti-consumer interest. For example, even some other directions which they've issued, ultimately it affects what is called discounts to consumers. So you will give a whole baggage of explanation saying, oh, I want every consumer to have the same kind of discount. But in effect, you're saying you will put a cap on the number of offers which are available, which is not in the interest of consumers. So there's a pattern to this decision-making process, which I believe is totally flawed. And really, regulators need to engage with experts who can guide them to prepare the framework and then address these issues, which are germane issues, but within the confines of their boundary. For example, TRAI was for telecom. In 2003 and 4, they extended it to broadcasting. It was properly done through a notification. Then there's a whole process of consultation and transparency. So if you really wanted to have something like this, put it out there for a much wider debate, correct? And then arrive at a decision.
Right.
But this, as I said, rush for judgment, doing it towards the end, and we know why all of this is happening now, with overspill into issues of privacy where a committee report is expected, right? You can't divorce these things completely. Just makes it a little ill-timed, hasty, ill-timed and hasty, and doesn't ultimately serve the purpose. So if there's a menace, it should be addressed correctly. As the call drop, I just gave that example because that's also a menace. But if you do it the wrong way, you end up paying the price, as in that case.
All right, gentlemen.
Which is why we have a regulatory adjudicatory system.
Yes, we do, and we don't know whether this order is now going to be challenged in a court of law. I would imagine that it certainly will be. We already have a very worried iPhone user here with me in the studio, and I suspect that Gopal is likely to be one as well. But appreciate you joining us here.
Like you, I'm a BlackBerry person.
All right, so the BlackBerry users have no fear here. But thanks very much for joining us on CNBC TV 18. We'll be back in a moment with a lot more.